So yes, welcome to our Twinkl Scotland TeachMeet sensory processing with myself. I'm just going to turn my sound off very quickly because then we won't hear anyone joining the meeting. That makes sense. So this is just a little bit about me. I'm not going to read off the screen. One, because I don't have enough voice for that, and two, I think there's nothing worse than having a PowerPoint and just reading straight off the screen. It's just boring. We get it. And it also seems a little bit self-congratulatory to, anyway. This is a little bit of my background. I have been teaching for, I think it's about 12 years now. I think after a certain point, it just turns into a long time. Before I did my teacher training, I used to work in play schemes for children with additional support needs. So I had a little bit of background, just not in a sort of strictly teaching sense. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. So I thought I'll go and do my PGDE, did that at the West of Scotland, University of West of Scotland, and did a year in mainstream and then went straight back into additional support needs, complex needs, worked in a variety of different provisions, specialist provisions within a mainstream unit, and a residential school. Excuse me, that's my final cough. I'm not letting myself have any more. And then also I do some kind of side hustly bits in addition to that. And obviously now work for the lovely Twinkl, which is brilliant. I'm part of the Scottish marketing team. You might have seen me annoying you with weekly emails and on Facebook, Instagram, X, the whole shebang. Yeah, so if you're wanting to get in touch with me after this, generally any of the Twinkl Scotland social medias, if you message them, you will get me, and I will put in my contact details at the end as well, because I know what these kind of things are like. At the end, we will have a Q&A, but sometimes it's a bit all that information to process. And at the time you think, oh yeah, that's fine. And then you go away and think about something and think, what on earth was she talking about? Or I'd love to know a bit more about that. So do get in touch with me once it's finished. If you have any questions, I don't bite, I promise. So what are we going to cover today? This is going to be the basic overview. So we're going to talk about sensory processing, go through our senses, think about our personal sensory preferences, hypo and hypersensitivity, sensory profiles, sensory diets, and then strategies that I found helpful. Now, these strategies will not be helpful for everyone, for every class, for every child, but I think it's kind of important to just say, well, this is the things that I've done that maybe have worked and maybe haven't worked equally, because then, I can make mistakes so you don't have to. It works for everyone. So what is sensory processing? So I'd like to start by giving a little overview of the sensory system and the senses we're going to be looking at as well. So whenever I walk into a classroom, especially a mainstream classroom, I'm always on the lookout for children who might be processing the sensory input a little bit differently, or they might need a slightly different input to what they're getting. And it's all very well me having my ASN background, and I do find it a lot easier when you're in that smaller class size and you have more adults and more eyes on the child. And it's easier to really dig deep into that sensory experience and provide that bespoke support. But there's also some broader considerations that we can make within a mainstream class to cater for all of our neurodivergent children, or simply those who have a sensory preference, because we're going to cover that as well. What is sensory processing then? The key question. Sensory processing, or sensory integration as it's sometimes referred to, is essentially the way that an individual takes in, processes, and then reacts to a sensory stimuli. That's it, in a nutshell. And differences with sensory processing. It is a key feature noticed in autistic individuals, but it's not exclusive to the autistic population. Hyper and hyposensitivities are noted to be more prevalent in autistic children and autistic adults. In studies, up to 96% of autistic children showed hypo or hypersensitivities in multiple senses. Now, don't panic if that makes no sense to you at the moment. We will talk about hypo and hypersensitivities, but just as a general number, 96% of autistic children are going to have some kind of sensory need, some sort of sensory difference. And that is a huge proportion. It's something that we really need to be thinking about, because especially when we think that in a mainstream class, you're going to have up to 30% of your children who are neurodivergent. This might be diagnosed, it might not be. I'm not going to go into all of that, because we all know what waiting lists are like for diagnoses. And we also all know that you shouldn't need a diagnosis to get the support that you need. it's good to have the diagnosis. It's good to have that label in the sense that then it makes it slightly easier to access supports, but then actually sometimes it doesn't, and we have to do everything as teachers in the class anyway. So, this is about kind of empowering you to have that information and to be able to make those calls and make those decisions for your class and for individuals within your class without having to wait years on waiting lists or wait for someone else's input. So it's not going to make you, an occupational therapist. It's not going to give you any kind of higher qualification than that, but, it's going to give you that overview, and it's going to, as I say, empower you with that knowledge that you can make these calls, hopefully, by the end of this presentation. So sensory processing and sensory preferences, they're not fixed in an individual, they will fluctuate, depending on so many other things, especially in an autistic child. Their needs fluctuate day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute, and sensory needs are no different. They will fluctuate, they will be very different depending on demand, depending on environment, depending on mood, depending on so many things, level of regulation. It's going to be different, and we have to just, be mindful of that, and be mindful that, the way we react to something one day may be very different to how we react to it another day. And sensory profiles and sensory preferences are super individualized. Everyone has got really specific sensory preferences, dislikes and intolerances. And just a wee note here that a dislike and an intolerance are different, but both should be respected, because disliking something and not being able to tolerate it are very different responses, and they come from different places as well, and that's okay, but both should be respected, because just because someone dislikes something, it makes them a bit uncomfortable, it's still distracting energy from their learning and from their day. So it shouldn't be something that we just, they'll just have to learn to like it, that kind of thing. We're not going to do that. So let's think about the 8 senses. Now, the reason I put a question mark there is because traditionally, when I was growing up, I was taught there was 5 senses, as the little diagram. We have 5 senses. And then a lot of places now, I saw a really interesting post from a local authority who shall remain nameless. It was quite an interestingly worded post. I felt it came across quite smug. Do you know there's more than 5 senses? There's actually 7. And I was like, actually, there's 8. But we're not going to get in an argument on Facebook about that. So interoception, we'll get to it in a minute. It is the most forgotten sense, and it is not given the clout that it requires. So let's just run through these one at a time. We've got vision, which is your sense of sight, auditory, hearing, olfactory is our sense of smell, gustatory, sense of taste, tactile, our sense of touch, vestibular, our balance and movement. Proprioception is where we are in space. So when I'm trying to explain this, especially when I'm trying to explain it to children, but it's also quite fun to do this when you're explaining it to adults, because everyone does it and then you can have a little giggle. So if you close your eyes and put your hand up in front of your face and wave it around, even with your eyes closed, you still know where your hand is. You know where your body is in space, and that is your proprioception. Then we have interoception, which is your internal senses. So things that are going on inside your body. Do you need the toilet? That's your interoception system telling you that you need the toilet. Things like hunger. And also, this is something really interesting that I read just in the past week that I wanted to put in. Emotions can be linked to interoception. Now, this was, some of you will be sitting going, well, yes, obviously. But my mind was blown by this. I just never thought of it. I'd never framed this thought in this way before. Because, so if a child is feeling angry, and we all know that child who they seem to go from 0 to 100 in the space of a second. They seem absolutely fine, absolutely golden, and then meltdown, complete dysregulation. And you think, how did we go from here to here? How can I work out, triggers? How can I put in support strategies if we are going literally in the blink of an eye from 0 to 100? And this could be to do with interoception, because if a child is feeling angry, they're going to get some, internal physiological symptoms, for a better word, of anger, but they might not be recognizing those. So it's not until the meltdown, the complete peak of dysregulation happens, that they are able to really tune into that. And I just thought that was really interesting. So I wanted to pop that in. As I say, some people will be sitting going, obviously, why has she not talked about this before? But it might just, be something a little new for some of you, like it was for me this week. And I found that really interesting. So I'm definitely going to do a little bit more research into that. Now, while we're going over the next couple of slides, I want you to just have a little think. Excuse me. Have a little think about your own sensory profile, your own preferences, your own dislikes, and make a couple of notes about that, because when we're later on, when we're thinking about writing sensory profiles and sensory diets and sensory circuits, it can be really good to sort of model yourself first and think, well, what would be useful for me? What do I do? And what do I need? And how could I give myself that feedback and that, sensory input, so that I'm not, sitting rattling my pen during a meeting and things like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but if I was doing that now, it would be incredibly annoying because my pen is right next to my microphone. So yes, just have a little think about your sensory preferences, and we'll talk a little bit about hypo and hypersensitivity. And yeah, the whole topic of sensory processing and preferences is so interesting, because it's an area we can all see some of our own characteristics in. And it is important to note here, just because you experience some sensory processing differences, this doesn't mean you are autistic. And I have to put this caveat in, because there was that sort of old-fashioned terminology of autism. It's a spectrum. We're all on the spectrum somewhere. No, we're not. You're either autistic or you're not. It is black and white. If you are autistic, there is a spectrum within autism. That is where the idea of the spectrum comes from. It's not that we're all on a sliding spectrum of a little bit autistic, a little bit not. No, that's not language that we use. I talk a lot about changing the lingo and keeping it really positive, and that's one of the things that we are trying to get rid of, because not everyone is a little bit autistic, and there's no such thing as being a little bit autistic. You either are or you aren't. As I say, it's very, very black and white. And so yes, it's interesting to look at sensory profiling from a personal perspective and think of where you fit in. If you're not comfortable doing that, think of a pupil that you're working with, think of a family member, and think of where they might sit into that. And if we can grasp the concept of sensory processing from a personal point of view, it becomes much easier to assess where a child may sit on that spectrum of sensory need. You'll find yourself becoming a bit of a sensory detective, and you'll be on the lookout for anything that might cause a problem for a child. And that means you're able to preempt issues and link sensory integration to behavioural needs. And that is a really important connection and distinction to make. It's a simpler process to investigate sensory profiling, as I say, in a specialist provision where you have higher staffing ratios and pupil numbers are lower. However, once we've got that overall grasp of the senses, you'll be able to make a sensory assessment of a classroom, an activity, a resource, and even the busiest of mainstream schools. And yes, bespoke support is the goal, but a broad consideration of sensory processing is an excellent starting point. I'm not expecting you to leave this training and go, right, I am going to go through every 30 children in my class and I'm going to do a sensory profile for everyone. No, not manageable, not okay on your workload, not okay on your mental health. We need to have a broad consideration which is going to cater for our neurodivergent children, or simply those with a sensory preference. And left to their own devices, a child might be misunderstood, mislabeled, but with support and help, they'll be able to better understand and negotiate their world. So as I say, as we go through the next few slides, think about where you sit. Is there anything you feel a particular connection with? Is there anything you really dislike? So let's talk about hypo and hypersensitivity. So I've written these the wrong way around in my notes. That's going to really annoy me. So I'm going to talk about hypersensitive first, just to be really irritating and jump about on this slide. I'm so sorry. So a child might be hypersensitive to sensory stimuli, which means their sensitivity is heightened. For example, a loud noise may cause them physical pain. Alternatively, a child could be hyposensitive or undersensitive to a sensory stimuli. They might not register a sensory input, at least not in the way we would expect based on how we perceive it ourselves. And we're not solely hypo or hypersensitive to inputs. So it's important to note here that an autistic child, or any child or an adult, is not singly hyper or hyposensitive to all inputs. They could be hypersensitive to visual input, hyposensitive to gustatory input, and show no outstanding response to tactile input. So it's all a little bit different. Sorry, just stopping to have a wee swig of my tea there. So we think about the window of tolerance here. We all have our window that we feel at our best. We're calm, our needs are met, and we're able to engage. Now, I literally mean, I visualize this as an actual window. I have pink curtains around my window because why not? But I visualize it like an actual window. I am right in the middle of that window. And I'm able to manage little fluctuations in my energy levels. Little blips, little irritations, little pauses, I'm able to manage those while staying in my window. But for a child, they might have a smaller window. A perceived small thing to me might be a big thing for them and might send them out their window. You know, an irritating noise while they're trying to concentrate, I might be able to block that out. They might not be able to do that. If they are hypersensitive to that input, that noise input, they might not be able to manage past that. And that's just going to, every tick of that clock is ticking them out of their window of tolerance. And if you're in your window of tolerance, great, calm, happy, stress-free, anxiety is reasonably low. If we go out of our window of tolerance, we either go up into our big behaviours, we are dysregulated, we are distressed, we are upset, or they can go down and we can retreat, quiet, you know, a child who maybe loses their verbal skills. Both of those are very dysregulated children. But the good news is we can manage that, we can help with that, and we can help give them strategies to deal with those fluctuations in sensitivity and sensory inputs. So we're going to do a quick recap of all the 8 senses. I'm going to go through each one and give you a little overview of what the sense is, and then talk about what a hyposensitive reaction might look like and what hypersensitivity might look like. So I will keep this to the point because this one can go on a little bit. So I'll not teach my granny to suck eggs when I'm talking about the different senses, but we'll just give a little brief overview. And this is something that if you're wanting to go and do a wee bit of extra reading about, there is loads of information out there. So as I'm doing this presentation, I know Louise is dropping some amazing links in the comments. These are resources, Twinkl resources that I have gone through and handpicked that I have used. All of them I have used, I have read, I have made sure that I agree with absolutely everything in them. I wouldn't be recommending them if I didn't. So these are all really interesting resources that you can use for. Some of them are for like personal reading, some of them are for to use in class, some of them are to display in class. So yeah, keep an eye on those links coming through. They're all very useful. So vision, the sense that takes in, understands and interprets what's seen. Visual input is received through the eyes and travels to the brain for processing. It's important for things like depth perception, spatial awareness, communication, exchanges and independence. Hyposensitivity may present as poor depth perception. Child might prefer to use their peripheral vision. They might be really attracted to bright lights. And we can help by really engaging with that total communication approach, using signing and visuals along with your verbal interactions, and having a well-lit environment. Contrasting colours on worksheets can also help. Hypersensitivity may look like a child who covers their eyes. They turn the lights off. They might show sensitivity to the white paper due to the glare. They may keep their face and eyes turned downwards. And we can help with this by reducing clutter, having that tidy workspace. I know anybody that knows me on this call will be thinking, what a hypocrite talking about a tidy workspace. I do try, I promise. Dimming the lights, using blinds and muted coloured paper, routines and a visual timetable. You can already see some themes forming here for both hypo and hypersensitivities. Total communication and visuals are a real key part of this approach. Auditory, our sense of hearing, detection of noise and sound via the ears. The outer and middle ear receive vibrations and sound information, which is transported to our inner ear and then the brain to be interpreted. It's the ability to hear and the ability to listen. This sense has a key role in communication, language and speech development, and also listening and social skills. Hyposensitivity to auditory input would look like a child who seeks out those loud noises. They may have a delayed or no response to a loud noise. So if something falls over and clatters in the classroom, you might have 5 children who jump a mile and one who completely, it might as well not have happened. They might be really hyposensitive to that auditory input and they've just not, it's not registered with them at all. This also might look like a child who might not respond to their name. So this might be the child that you say their name over and over and over and over and over again, and you get absolutely no response because they're just not registered and it's just not on their radar at all. This child might really enjoy some rhythmic tapping or vibration sensations. And we can really help by using the child's name at the start of any interaction to get their attention, clear short instructions, visuals, processing time, and engaging with music activities to learn about rhythm and beat. It can be a nice, enjoyable thing for that child. Hypersensitivity may appear as a child who's overwhelmed by the slightest noise. They might cover their ears. They might make their own noise to mask external noise. So this often looks like the child, and I know who I'm thinking of. I bet we've all got a child who is very sensitive to noise, but is also the noisiest child in the room. Now, let me explain that. So you might have a child who makes a lot of almost like white noise themselves. They might hum, they might just make a noise. And you think, how can they be noise sensitive, but they're making so much noise themselves? It's actually to block out that background noise. So they are making their own noise that they can control, which is a really important thing for our kids, especially our autistic children. They like to be in control. They like that predictable response. They are controlling that situation by producing their noise, which puts everything else out of the picture. You know, they can't hear anything else over that. And I didn't click with that very early on. That was only, a few years ago that I realized this and I read about this. But it makes so much sense, because if you can't cope with unpredictability of noises, and noise might cause you pain, you do want to be neutralizing that and you want to be controlling that. So that's why your noisiest child in the room might also be the one who's sensitive to noise. So you can help in this way by offering ear defenders, removing any external noises. If you have a fan in the class, if you have an overhead projector that clicks, things like that. Having white or red noise on in the background can be a nice leveler for everyone. Having a quiet space and teaching the child how to ask for a break to that quiet space if needed. So having a quiet space is great, but we also need to teach how to use it. We need to teach how to request it, and it needs to be a consistent response that we give when break is requested. Olfactory is our sense of smell. So that's detecting scent particles, and it's really closely linked to taste. And this sense is key in engaging memories. Have you ever smelt something and had that deja vu sense, or maybe a childhood memory resurface? I had this the other day. I was using a moisturiser that I've not used in years, and I put it on and I remembered a holiday that I'd been at. It was like I was there. It was bizarre. That sense is just so linked to memories, which can be really useful as well when we're teaching, but that's another story. Hyposensitivity may present as a child licking items, or maybe really enjoying a strong odour. So we can help by using smelling opportunities, investigating smells, lotions, scented Play-Doh, getting all that within our sensory play, within our messy play. We are going to provide a safe outlet for this sensory input. So we're not just going to let a child go and investigate what they want and, maybe do something that's a bit unsafe. We're going to do it in a safe environment, a controlled environment. Hypersensitivity may cause a child to feel nauseous or vomit with certain smells. They might have toilet avoidance due to this. So this is always a really key one to think about if you have a child who's reluctant to use the bathroom or reluctant to go to the bathroom. Are they really sensitive to the smells that are through there? Because even if you think, well, it's clean, the smell of that kind of chemical clean smell might be really upsetting and dysregulating to that child. So I'm not saying every child who has toilet avoidance has this, but it could be something that we can think about. A child might react really strongly to faint smells as well. So we can help this by keeping a well-ventilated classroom. And if we know that a child struggles with smells, maybe advising staff not to wear any strong smelling perfumes, because that could be a really easy way for a child to avoid that staff member, or for a child to be showing a certain reaction to that staff member. Excuse me. Now we're going to do gustatory, our sense of taste. Processing taste and flavour, personal likes and dislikes, and forms the basis of understanding harmful and safe foods. Hyposensitivity is a child who's drawn to extreme flavours, overfills their mouth, eats very quickly, might bite their lips. And we can again help this by giving an appropriate self-regulatory strategy. If a child is trying to bite or chew, we can provide a variety of textured food, maybe a chewy, do some different mouth noises like making a buzz sound or clicking, giving them different things to do with their mouth. Hypersensitivity, a child really avoids strong tasting food. They might have a lot of texture preferences. They might struggle with brushing their teeth. And we can help by keeping food separate if that's what a child needs. If they need their baked beans in a separate plate to their dry food, that's absolutely fine. If that means they're going to eat we'll go with it. Deep pressure before and after meals can help regulate a child, and exploring food in a sensory play setting. Just a little side note on this. I worked with a child who had, looking back, a huge hyposensitivity to this gustatory input. The things that child would try and eat, oh my heavens. They really enjoyed very strong flavours, such as hand sanitizer. And yeah, so there's obviously a bit of a safety element there. So we had to be very, very careful what was available, because this child craved those strong flavours. They really did. Now, there was some other things going on with that child as well. It wasn't only sensory likes and dislikes, but that, I think, was a strong part of it. Moving on to tactile, this is our sense of touch. Skin detects pressure, vibration, movement, temperature, pain, and that helps us understand our direct environment. This contributes towards body awareness, visual perception, and motor planning. Hyposensitivity is presenting with things like poor fine motor skills, a low response to pain. A child might nip, scratch, or bite themselves. They might also really enjoy messy play, heavy blankets, and different textures, or being barefoot in the classroom. We can help by giving lots of opportunities to be tactile throughout the day. Things like access to weighted items, fidget tools, or messy play. Now, just as a quick caveat here as well, in my notes I've actually written fidget toys, but I'm trying to change my language to fidget tools, because I think they are tools. They're not just toys that we use. And I think calling them tools, it's helped me explain their use to colleagues who maybe aren't as convinced they are tools. Maybe if I'm having to sort of justify their use to management, calling them fidget tools has really helped me over calling them fidget toys. So just a little passing on of, as I say, let me make mistakes so you don't have to. That is something I've learned recently. So yes, fidget tools rather than fidget toys. And hypersensitivity, maybe a child who's touch avoidant. They may cause pain. It might cause them pain to be touched. They might be quite sensitive to textures, for example, labels on clothes. They might have difficulty with personal care tasks such as hairbrushing, nail cutting, and they might really dislike being dirty. We can help by avoiding light touch. You know, if we do have to touch a child, if we're holding their hand or whatever, we'd be quite firm with that. You know, don't just brush their hand. That might be a bit irritating to them. Offer things like gloves for messy play, or put things in sandwich bags. I worked with a child who loved the idea of messy play but couldn't bring themselves to touch it. So we gave them everything in sandwich bags, and they wore 2 pairs of gloves. Now, after a year, they went down to 1 pair of gloves, and that was fabulous. You know, they were getting the input, they were getting the engagement, the involvement that they wanted, but they weren't compromising their sensory needs, which was brilliant. It was a great way to get them to engage. So vestibular is our sense of movement and balance. It's coordinating movements of our head with our eyes, integrating both sides of the body, and things like feeling direction and speed. It's involved with developing muscle tone and helps with life skills such as zipping our coat or putting on shoes. Hyposensitivity looks like a child who's actively seeking movements, rocking, jumping, spinning, that child that's constantly on the move. They might bump into people or objects, they might hold their head at a certain angle, or they might bang their head off surfaces or with their hands. We can help by providing regular movement breaks to encourage focus and concentration, regular breaks to engage in that rocking and spinning or jumping, whatever movement they need, we should be giving them it regularly throughout the day. Hypersensitivity might look like a child who loses balance easily. They might appear clumsy, move in a cautious manner, and show a fear response to uneven surfaces like stairs. We can help a child by supporting them to engage with appropriate movement, gentle, slow movements that deliberately engage specific parts of the body or specific muscles. So proprioception, this is the one where we are in space. So, you know, the hold out your hand, give it a wave one. That's us here. So we have proprioceptive receptors in our skin, muscles, and joints. So that's where we're going to focus our supports with this. It's important for supporting self-regulation, developing coordination, and really important for our sense of self. Hyposensitivity may include a lack of awareness of body positioning. So a child might use excessive force. They might throw something really hard, or they might have a really high pain threshold. We can give input to extend muscles, compress joints, and generally provide a bit of resistance. Deep pressure, weighted blanket, stretching activities like yoga or a resistance band. You know, anything that's giving that bit of compression, those regular squeezes. Hypersensitivity might look like a child who's very lethargic, really aware of their body position and changes to their position. They might have poor fine motor skills and be very sensitive to touch. We can help by focusing on calming regulatory activities like deep pressure and positive physical contact. And the final sense is interoception. So this is what's happening inside your body: thirst, hunger, tired, temperature, toilet urges. Hyposensitivity may present as a child who doesn't recognise feelings of fullness when eating or the need to go to the toilet. So we can help them by engaging with things like yoga and mindfulness and just reminding them of that awareness of their body and getting in touch with their body. Deep pressure can help them feel really calm and in touch with their body in the moment, and timers and routines for toilets and meals can help. Hypersensitivity might look like a child who's easily distracted, confuses nervous inputs, like an itch gets confused with pain. They might show poor focus and attention. Again, thinking about our breathing, really getting in touch with our body can help. Visually and verbally labelling emotions and responses, and engaging with rhythmical motions like rocking or swinging can really help centre us. Yeah, I mean, I fully appreciate that last one wouldn't be for everyone, but it's just to give you a little bit of an idea about what some of our children are experiencing day to day in class with a number of sensory inputs. And if you can imagine a time that you found you were a bit overwhelmed with a sensory input, and there'd be some small inconvenience. You know, you're feeling a wee bit dysregulated, you've had a really busy morning, you couldn't get the kids out the house into school in time, there was a shirt not ironed, somebody'd lost their shoes, someone hadn't done their homework, we got everybody hassled and out the door, we got to school, some random light came on in your car on the way to school, you're not entirely sure what's going on there, your head teacher popped in and went, "Oh, remember that observation this morning?" And you're just completely overwhelmed. And something is going to annoy you that day, and it's going to be something like someone sitting tapping their pen, or maybe that clock that's over in the corner, that ticking is just driving you insane. You know, these little things it's going to be something small that's going to tip you over the edge. And that is why we might see a dysregulation, a behavioural off challenge from one of our young people, when actually it's not that's caused the problem. There's been a lot of other things building up to that. But we need to be aware of that sensory environment, because we don't want that to be the thing that tips a child over the edge. So what are we going to do about it? We're going to build a sensory profile for our child. So an autistic child may present with a particular sensory profile showing a range of hyper and hyposensitivities. If we're aware of a child's sensory profile, excuse me, and we're preempting these difficulties by engaging them with sensory integration throughout the day, we're going to minimise the chance of a behaviour being used to gain sensory feedback. So by that, I mean, if we are regularly providing sensory breaks, sensory opportunities, and a chance to engage those senses, we're not going to be reduced to some of the things that we spoke about earlier. You know, a child biting themselves, or, you know, a child really needing that deep pressure so much that they run up and push something, they push a chair over, or, you know, they push another child, or the child that, you know, is craving that intense taste experience, so they go and, you know, grab some hand sanitizer and lick it off their own hand. You know, we need to be providing these opportunities in a safe, maintainable, sustainable way. So if we know a child, for example, is hyposensitive to a tactile input and responds well to deep pressure, instead of waiting for that child to demonstrate the pressure-seeking activity, we're going to engage them in deep pressure activities throughout the day. Now, this could be something like squeezies. So I call deep pressure squeezies. You know, when we're doing hand squeezies, leg squeezies, shoulder squeezies, we could do a little routine 3 or 4 times throughout the day at regular points. We could put that on the timetable. We could also, if we see the child becoming a little bit dysregulated, pop that weighted backpack on them and ask them to go and deliver a message. They're getting that walking, they're getting that weight on their shoulders. So those are actually 2 slightly different strategies. So we would be using the regular inputs, but we would also have that in case of emergency strategy in place. So let's have a think now about our sensory diet. So building a sensory profile leads on to establishing a sensory diet. A sensory diet is a carefully selected set of regulatory activities designed to meet the specific sensory needs of that child, which can be integrated throughout the day in order to help the pupil feel calm and alert at appropriate times. So thought should be given to timing, frequency, intensity, and duration of sensory input. Undertaken correctly, the sensory diet can increase concentration, support self-regulation, and increase that potential for learning. Because if you think a child will be wasting so much anxiety and energy worrying about sensory input and giving that time to sensory input, and if we can take that pressure away from them and almost give that strategy to deal with it for them, then they can energy, that anxiety, they can direct all that energy into their learning, and that's where we want it to be. So the sensory diet is, yes, it's how we're going to meet those individual needs identified in the sensory profile. And to maintain a healthy diet, we eat 3 meals a day. To maintain a healthy sensory system, we have to feed it regularly. So obviously that's a bit of an oversimplification, but a sensory diet combined with specific self-taught self-regulation strategies will go a long way to helping a child with a sensory processing disorder feel regulated. And if they're not feeling regulated, we've got strategies in the profile to help. So think of your sensory diet as your meals. You're using them regularly throughout the day as input. And then your strategies are your snacks. If you need one, you take one. If you need a snack, you get a snack. If you need the walk around with a heavy backpack, for example, you get that. But you've also got your regular bits throughout the day. So how are we going to create this sensory diet? We're going to identify behaviours, we're going to observe, we're going to note the sense and whether it's hypo or hypersensitivity. We're going to plan how we're going to meet this need through the child's day. We're going to preempt it. We're not waiting to see sensory seeking behaviour. We're using your strategy before and we're using it consistently. And we're going to constantly be assessing that. Is this working? Do we need more sensory input? Do we need to try something else? And the diet should be flexible, playing to a child's strengths, and not in any way place additional pressure or additional demand on the pupil. So it's not about stamping out unwanted behaviours. It's about helping find coping strategies and ways that we can adapt the environment. So things that I've found helpful, just to things that I've done that have been useful for children with sensory processing difficulties. And I mean, some of these you'll think, she'll go on about a total communication approach for anything. And yes, I will, to be honest, but it is really, really useful. So we want to be including signing and visual supports alongside our speech. We want to make sure that, for example, the child who needs the break, the movement break, even when they are dysregulated, can they still ask for that movement break? If the child is verbal, do they still have those verbal skills in times of peak dysregulation? And if the answer is no, they need a backup plan. All children need to be able to access this at all times, not just when they are anxiety-free, calm, and able to access verbal skills or their preferred method of communication. We need to have a backup plan in case they can't access those skills. We want to engage in routines. We want to have a consistent and predictable environment. That can help really with your vision and your interoception, having those routines. So if you have a child who's not identifying those needs to go to the toilet, those feelings of hunger, having those clear points in the day that we go to the toilet or we eat can really help embed that and stop those sensory seeking behaviours happening. We want to have a quiet break space available. We want to teach children how to request a break. It's not contingent on behaviour. It's not used as a reward. Or if you do this job, you can go and have your quiet break. No, because that child, the child who you're almost having to bribe to do their activity to get access to the space, that's the child who really needs that break. And they need it now. They don't need it in 10 minutes when they've finished their numeracy, because that's when the behaviours are going to happen, and that's when you're going to be challenged by the situation, when actually we could have stepped in beforehand, we could have provided this break. And a break is not about not finishing a piece of work, it's about taking a break from it and then coming back to it and finishing it when we're in a place that we can engage properly. Sensory circuits. Now, sensory circuits are amazing. They're a brilliant way of giving that sensory diet. So, for example, for some children, a sensory diet may look like deep pressure 3 times a day. But for a lot of children, it's going to look like a sensory circuit. It's going to look like a movement break. And these are amazing ways to get children moving and you can target multiple inputs in one go. So a circuit generally has your alerting, organising and calming activities. So you're alerting to get your ready to really get your brain working, to get you, doing something. Organising can be something where you're just sorting, you're matching, you're organising your body. And then calming, that's when your deep pressure can come in as part of a sensory circuit, and that can be lovely. Really good as part of your daily routine. I would recommend first thing in the morning, after break and after lunch, to settle back into learning. It's a really good indicator to the brain that, whatever happened outside is finished. We are in class, we are focusing, we are getting, connected, we're getting engaged with our work. And it's a really good way of everyone getting their wiggles out, to put it in a sort of cheeky way. But you get your wiggles out, and then we're ready to focus, we're ready to engage, and our bodies are ready. Now, deep pressure, I can't even explain how helpful I've found deep pressure to be for so many children, whether it's via a weighted blanket, a lap mat, a vest, via massage. It's so helpful for a variety of children. There's so many different strategies you can use. There's so many ways you can incorporate deep pressure into your day. And again, doing it as a regular part of your day. I often do a relax first thing in the morning and last thing in the day, just to get everyone regulated from coming into school, getting settled in the classroom. And I had taught a group of children do their own little hand squeezes, their own little hand massages. So they're getting that lovely relaxing music. We've got the lights turned down. It's a very, calm environment, and they're also getting a little bit of deep pressure, and they were able to do it to themselves, so they didn't have the added sort of complexity of someone else touching them and all that kind of thing. It was just a really nice, calm way of starting and ending our day, because also it gets everyone ready for leaving and going back in their taxis or however they get home. And emotional literacy, teaching self-regulation by offering co-regulation. And I've just realised there's a capital I in literacy, which is going to really annoy me, so I will get that changed before this gets uploaded. A child's not going to know how to use any of the strategies we've discussed by themselves. They need you to show them. They need you to model, co-regulate, and then eventually they will learn to self-regulate. And if we teach the strategies when they're calm, and when their anxiety is low, and when they're happy, when we are distressed, when we are dysregulated, they become easier to access, because it's not an unknown, it's a predictable response. And that taps in again to that love of predictability, that need for that standardized, consistent response. And yes, occupational therapist. If you can find one, grab them and do not let them go. They are fabulous, and they will teach you all sorts of, deep pressure routines. They have access to resources. Please do not go out and spend your own money on resources for things like this. It's the school's responsibility, and I know that budgets might not account for things, but OTs can help you access funding. They can help you put together a sensory profile. They can look over a sensory profile, a sensory diet, sensory circuits that you've prepared, and give you just a bit of an idea of what's going on. And other things I've found useful to do in class is having your fidget tools available, regular tough tray, messy play activities, really getting the children using their hands, being tactile. Things like having movement breaks, having maybe a yoga break, walks outside, a sensory pathway, anything that's just encouraging those different senses to engage and integrating those different senses. And yes, as I've said about weighted items, they are really good. Please do consult with your OT to get the correct size and weight for a child, because there are specific rules on weighting for these. You're able to find it online. I'm not going to read anything out just now, because I am not the expert. I am not qualified to be making judgments on that. But yes, do speak to your OT about weighted items for a child. They are amazing. They're invaluable, but we have to get the weight right for the size and the weight of the child. So this is my contact details. If you enjoyed today as well, I have my little book, which is pink. It looks fabulous on your bookshelves, and it's got a whole chapter about, sensory processing. It's got loads of different information in there, and all different, it's just great. And I know I would say that because I wrote it, but go and have a wee look. It's available on Amazon or via my publisher at Critical Publishing. If you have any questions, we're going to do a wee bit of questions just now, but I am aware it is 8 minutes to 5 and you'll want to get away. I will do a couple of questions just now. Any others, I will catch up with people later. If you go away and have a think and think, what on earth was she talking about? Or I really want to clarify something, please do just email me or find me on socials, or as I say, any of the Twinkl Scotland socials. It will probably be me that picks up your message if you go on them. And if it's not me, the person who picks it up will get it to me if it's about TeachMeet.